Hello and welcome back. So week 22 is closing right as we speak. This is Sunday, so the final games are going to be played today. If you made it through week 22, you now need to look forward to week 23 and maximizing your waiver adds and utilizing the schedule in your favor, because as you probably noticed yesterday, the heavy nights are going to be very difficult for you to add players, and it's very difficult for you to get players into your lineup on nights where there's 15 games going on. So this is where we're going to take a look at the schedule as we always do. And you're looking at John Carlson on the screen. There's a potential he could come back as early as Thursday, and that is important because if you've stashed him like I have for the entire time that he's been out, he's a top 10, currently number 11th on the Data Draft Player Hub because of how complete he is. He might not block as many shots after he literally cracked his skull after that last one, but he's still a really elite level power play quarterback, and he's potentially getting injected back into your lineup at the perfect time for your fantasy playoffs. So I wanted to highlight that, and just look at the guy. He cracked his skull and severed an artery in his head, and he's back playing hockey 3 months later. That's a hockey player for sure. But let's take a look at the schedule. Week 23, no teams play twice. That's the good news. You also have a bunch of teams playing 4 times. 14 teams play 4 times. The rest play 3 times. Nobody plays twice. The main thing to think about is whether your goalies will get enough starts. If you have a starter or two that aren't going to be playing more than 3 games, you have to ask yourself, do you need to add a goaltender? Maybe you need to think about a goalie stream, which we'll get to later in the video, but nothing crazy. There's a couple teams that play 4 times, but not every 4-game schedule is created equal. So let's look at some of the best schedules for week 23. Now, the best schedule is undoubtedly Colorado, and this is what we were talking about months ago when I did the early look at the playoffs and how Colorado plays a lot of off nights. Well, this is a perfect example. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, all the light nights. And those are days when you're getting 5 games, 2 games on Wednesday. So the games are going to be Colorado, Pittsburgh, and Arizona, Edmonton on Wednesday night. So those are the 4 teams you want to look at, and they're all right here. We're going to cover 3 or 4 of those. We're not going to cover Edmonton because they do have a 3-game week, and there's pretty much nobody you can add from Edmonton that'll get you consistent production, as we've covered numerous times on the weekly videos here. But for Colorado, a really nice schedule, 2 winnable games, although this one might be a little tougher because Arizona is at home. Believe it or not, that is a matchup that they actually have to worry about. But other than that, a nice matchup here against Chicago, who they themselves have been taking shots at some of the best teams in the league, including Boston lately, so that's not going to be a pushover game. Pittsburgh desperately needs this game, so that's going to be difficult as well, but this is as good as you can get in terms of strength of schedule and all the off nights. We'll cover some Colorado adds, as well as a big question that I've been getting about Colorado players. Now, the next schedule is Arizona. They play 3 of the off nights, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. I have them in the hardest schedule as well, because look at the teams that they're playing. No easy games, a road back-to-back in Winnipeg and in Edmonton. And from what I've heard, it's very difficult to fly into Edmonton. Wherever you're staying is about an hour outside of the airport. So they're going to get out of Winnipeg late. They're going to get into Edmonton late. That's going to be really tough for them. But it is one of the 2 games playing on Wednesday, so you do have to factor that in. And then Pittsburgh, they desperately need to start winning some games. Their goaltending has fallen apart. They have some injuries to deal with. And they're still battling for a wild card spot. So that's a must-win week for Pittsburgh Penguins, so there's added incentive. They do play 2 light nights, and then they play 2 heavy nights, so that is something to keep in mind. And then these are basically the only other teams that play light nights. Edmonton plays 2. They have the Monday, Wednesday, a couple off days, and then they go to Vegas on Saturday. And then you have Calgary playing the Monday night. They have a road back-to-back in LA, in Anaheim, so that's going to be potential goal fest on Tuesday, but that's a heavier night for your roster. And then you also have Detroit playing Monday against Florida. Florida looking to climb their way back into playoff contention. That'll be a difficult game for Detroit. But then they have 2 winnable matchups against St. Louis, and then another winnable matchup against Philadelphia. So just keep that in the back of your mind for this week. And then let's turn to some of the worst schedules. Now, worst is relative. How do you factor in worst? Well, for Carolina, they're playing all the heavy nights, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And they're playing 2 top 10 teams in the league, New York and Toronto. And then they also have the back-to-back against Boston. So that is a gauntlet. and they are fighting for positioning with New Jersey at the top of the Metro. So this will be a big week in terms of positioning in the Metro division. So that's not an easy schedule, and you're not going to want to add players from the Canes this week because of this. You're probably have a full lineup on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday anyways, and then maybe this game you could think about adding somebody, but even then, there's not a ton of offense in terms of depth for Carolina, so this would not be the best place to stream somebody, in my opinion. We touched on Arizona, so LA is the other schedule to take note of because they do play that Monday and they do play Sunday, so 2 off nights, but there's a massive gap in between. So I would look at this and pick up somebody for Monday, drop them, and then pick up somebody for Sunday if you need that Sunday stream to help you push yourself over the top and win your matchup week to week. And then you also have Ottawa. They have a very difficult schedule. At Pittsburgh, a road back-to-back going to Boston. That's pretty much a guaranteed loss on the second night of a back-to-back going into Boston. Then they go and they play home against Tampa Bay on Thursday. That's a difficult game. And then away at the Rock against New Jersey, who's also fighting for positioning in the Metro. Nothing easy about this schedule. A lot of travel involved, some really tough teams for Ottawa. So just keep that in the back of your mind if you were thinking about adding some Sens, but there's not a whole lot to add because most of their production comes from their top 6. But that'll do it for the schedule portion. Let's get into the waiver adds from the teams that we talked about a couple seconds ago, and we'll start with the Colorado Avalanche. Now, odds are you know which Avs you're going to want to try to add, so we won't cover a ton of them here, but there are a couple of guys that we need to mention. Sam Girard, 26% owned. He's cooled off a little bit lately because Makar's back. He's getting a little bit less power play time, but he's still on the power play every now and then. So he got a power play point in the last 8 games, 3 assists, 13 shots, still blocking a bunch of shots as well. So that helps you out. This is the rankings in terms of how complete they are in a league with hits and blocks. Obviously, Lekkonen's a big loss. If you owned him, he's one of the most complete players, hitting, doing a lot of everything, getting power play time. So somebody else is going to fill in on the power play. We'll cover that in just a second. And one of the guys that's been stepping up is Dennis Malgin. If you're in a deep league, Malgin, center right wing, dual eligible, 3 goals, 1 assist, 12 shots in his last 8 games. And there's been flashes where he's looked really productive offensively. If they give him a little bit of a shot in the top 6 or even in the top 9 and then some power play time in a deep league, that's some exposure that you're going to want to get. He's not the most complete player, and he hasn't been doing it for very long in terms of his file. Not getting a ton of assists and goals and whatnot when he was in Toronto, but now starting to come over and find a role for himself in Colorado. But yeah, these 2 guys are some of the better options. There's 2 other options that are missing though, and I've been getting constant questions, so I thought we'd devote an entire slide to this. And we're talking about Compher versus Evan Rodrigues. So what you're looking at here is their player hubs side by side, so you can get a look at exactly what the difference is between the 2 of them. First off, the change interval. Compher is going down and Evan Rodrigues is going up, and you can see that in the stats. Rodrigues, 5 points in his last 8 games, 2 goals, 3 assists, 19 shots. Compher, only 2 points in his last 8 games, 13 shots. And that's the main differential, shot volume. 92nd percentile for Evan Rodrigues, almost 3 shots per game. That's what he likes to do. So if you're in a points league that has some weighting for shots and goals, because he gets a little bit more goals coverage, whereas Compher's more of an assist guy, then that would favor Evan Rodrigues. If for whatever reason you need blocks as opposed to shots or goals or whatever, that's where Compher comes into play. 75th percentile in blocks, which makes him a little bit more complete, which is why his rating is higher. But basically, slightly higher point per game for Compher, slightly higher, actually considerably higher shots per game for Rodrigues. Rodrigues is a little bit hotter now than Compher. And as far as I know, they're still using Compher in the top 6 with Rantanen on the second line. Rodrigues is getting bumped up, but you have to monitor the line assignments game by game, especially during your playoffs when the details matter, because any given game they'll bump Compher to the power play 1 or they'll bump somebody else to PP1. And whoever is playing on that power play is who you're going to want to add if you have the ability to add either of them. And there's no guarantee that if you add one of them, they'll stay on the power play all week. So you do have to keep that in mind and try to monitor the line assignments. If you own one of them and you're wondering if you should drop them, Compher is maybe a drop. If you can find somebody more productive in a 3-game week or even a 4-game week on the heavy nights, obviously Compher is going to get into your lineup 4 times this week because he's playing all the light nights. So maybe factor that in. But you could potentially find somebody who's a little bit more valuable in 3 games than Compher would be in 4 games, just because he's a little bit colder than he was earlier in the season. But this is what it breaks down to. If you're going to ask me about these 2 guys, I'll point you to this video because this is basically a push. Either one of these guys are good waiver adds. It's just a matter of what you need. Do you need the shots? Do you need the blocks? Other than that, they're very similar players, and they're not extremely productive lately, but Rodrigues has been a little bit more productive than Compher. But that'll do it for the Avs ads. Let's get to the place where you could really mine some fantasy value, and that is Arizona. Now, Arizona has a ton of guys that are ownable. Nobody wants Coyotes. They're one of those teams that they have a stink on them. Nobody wants to add these guys because of the team exposure, but they're actually playing pretty well. And now with Clayton Keller going off and being one of the best players in all of fantasy over the last 2 weeks or so, even a little bit further back than that, you want some access to some of those top players. So if you can get Keller, he's the obvious ad. Schmaltz is a pretty obvious ad. Lawson Krause, if you're looking for the most complete player, he's the #1 most complete player on the hub, 73 overall, and he's trending in the right direction along with Keller, but also Barrett Hayton. He's one of the hottest players in the league over the past week or two. 12 points in his last 7 games, 23 shots, so almost a little bit over 3 shots per game, 26% owned, single position center. So he's not going to be that flexible for you in a week like this, but he does play 3 of the light nights, so he'll get into your lineup at least 3 times. They are tough matchups, but still, he's centering the top line. And here's how the lines break down. So it's Keller, Hayton, and Schmaltz on the top line, Michelli, McBain, and Krause on the second line, Ritchie, Boyd, and Fisher on the third line. So of these guys, Barrett Hayton, top line center, power play 1 time, really productive over the last 7 games. That's the #1 ad in terms of guys that you can probably own. Keller's probably owned up. Schmaltz might be. Krause could be available for you, but Hayton is a lot hotter right now. If you need that defenseman, that power play quarterback defenseman, Juuso Valimaki, 7 points in his last 4 games, 12 shots. So he's been the power play quarterback ever since they shipped out Chikrin and Gostisbehere. I had some thoughts about J.J. Moser, who was power play quarterback a little bit earlier in the season, but it hasn't been Moser, it's been Valimaki, and he's been taking over and running with that position. 7 points in his last 4 games is something to take note of. I think he's a little bit more assist heavy, obviously 6 assists in the 4 games, only 1 goal, so you're not going to get a ton of shots and you're not going to get a ton of goals, but he is one of the few power play quarterbacks that you can actually own off the waiver wire, 14%. So that is something to take note of if you need a power play quarterback defenseman, if you're trying to add some power play points for your category leagues, or if you get extra weighting for power play points in your points leagues. And if you do, Travis Boyd, 2% owned, center right wing. As I just mentioned, he's playing third line on 5-on-5, but he is top power play right now. He's got 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points in his last 8 games, 3 of those on the power play. So he's been really productive with limited minutes 5-on-5 compared to a guy like Hayton, who's getting all the top line minutes. So in a deep league, if you need that power play exposure and some point production in general, Travis Boyd is a nice place to go to. And speaking of power play exposure and really hot right now, Matias Michelli, 3% owned, single position left winger, but again, he's playing 3 of the light nights, so you don't really have to worry about that positional flexibility as much. 9 points in his last 8 games, 1 power play point. He's a little bit more assist heavy, but the goal scoring has been coming compared to earlier in the season. When I featured him a lot earlier in the season, it was all assists, no goals, but he's got 3 goals in his last 8 games, so that is a nice sign in the right direction for Michelli, who is a rookie. So you would think that he's a little bit streaky, but right now he's red hot, so you might as well ride that streak if you're in a deep league. If you're in a deep league and you're watching this video, these are the main guys that you're going to look at because obviously Colorado's not going to have a ton. You could potentially look at Malgin, as I just mentioned. Lars Eller scored the other night, but this team has a lot of really decent players that are on hot streaks that are relatively ownable, especially in deep leagues for you. There's 2 other options that I didn't really mention so far. Jack McBain 3 goals, 4 assists, 7 points, 32 hits in his last 8 games. And as I just mentioned, he's the second-line center for this team. And then Victor Soderstrom, relatively high first-round draft pick, comes over. He was getting a little bit of power play time, but it's PP2 time. 4 assists, a power play point, 15 shots, 13 blocks in his last 8 games. You can see him a little bit further down, but his change interval is massive because he hasn't played a ton of games this year, and he's been improving, going in the right direction. Same type of thing for Brett Ritchie. Hasn't played a ton of games, so a lot of these guys, Dauphin, with a massive change interval, they just haven't played a lot, which means that anytime that they're playing 10 games or whatever, and they have a nice week or whatever, that is going to bump their change interval a lot. But the guys at the top of this list are the guys you're going to want to target in a 12-team, 14-team league. Some of these guys are probably still available for you there, so you might want to take a look at them in a nice 4-game week with 3 off nights for Arizona. And last but not least, we have Pittsburgh. Now, nobody ownable is doing anything right now for Pittsburgh offensively. On top of that, 3 of their top 6 D are out, and their starting goalie is struggling mightily, and he's been dropped. I dropped him. A bunch of other people have started dropping him. The only guy I can recommend offensively is Jason Zucker. No goals in his last 3 games, but still 9 goals in his last 11 games, and he does get a ton of shots and hits when he's not scoring. So that is the nice little floor to his file. In those 3 games without any goals, he had 11 shots and 7 hits. So still contributing to the game, contributing to your fantasy team in those games when he's not productive. But he was red hot for an extended stretch, probably around 10 games or so. He was red hot, scoring goals, no assists, but all goal coverage. So that could factor in if you're in a points league that weights goals. Not a lot of power play exposure either, but he is pretty much cemented on that second line with Evgeny Malkin. So this is a week that the Penguins really need to win. They have a couple of matchups that are going to be difficult against Colorado, against Dallas, but they do have 2 games that are games that they need to win desperately against Ottawa and Washington. So in those games, I would expect guys like Zucker, who are gamers, to step up and make an impact. Now, other than that, there's really not a lot to go for. So this one's a question mark. They do have 3 of their top 6 D out. Could Ty Smith get a call-up? If he does, this was his file from earlier in the year. He was quarterbacking the power play because both Petrie and Letang were out. Now, Letang is healthy. He's playing, not only playing well, but he's playing a ton of minutes. 29 minutes, I believe, last game. With that many defensemen out, you're going to have to ride your top defenseman. So I would expect Letang to continue to get the power play time, but still 93rd or 92nd percentile in shot volume, 3 shots per game for Ty Smith, and then getting a bunch of hits as well. Not really something that I would have expected from an offensive defenseman, but he was doing that when he was called up last time. So does he get the call up? If he does, he could be a nice little streaming option, especially early in the week on the Monday and Wednesday night games, because again, there's only 2 games Wednesday and 5 games on Monday. So that's a question mark. I don't know if he gets called up. If he does, just keep an eye on him if you need that defenseman exposure. Petrie might come back at some point. Pettersson could come back at some point. He would be an own for hits and blocks and some offensive production as well. But other than that, the only other guy you'd want access to is Casey DeSmith. 16% owned, and he's been much better than Tristan Jarry over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so. Last 4 games, 2 wins, 1.4 goals against, 941 save percentage. They need to win, and they have a back-to-back this week. They're going to play DeSmith at least once, if not twice. It'll be interesting to see if they trust Jarry enough to give Jarry 3 starts, or if they're going to say, oh no, you're going to get 2, Casey DeSmith will get 2, we need to win games, we have to do whatever we have to do to win. And right now, Casey DeSmith is playing better than Tristan Jarry, although Jarry did have a couple of good games this week. He did get pulled last night against the Rangers, but he did play pretty well against them in 2 other games. So Jarry is kind of a question mark. He's up and down. If you're wondering what to do with him, I've already dropped him, but I do have the luxury of a bye week this week. So keep that in mind. If you have Jarry and you're wondering what to do, I would maybe hold on to him at least until this Thursday game, because they're going to need to use the other goaltender for the back-to-back and then make a decision for this Saturday game if your week depends on it. I don't know. I would look up his stats and how he plays against Washington and then make that determination on Saturday. But these are the only really ownable guys in Pittsburgh. Everybody else is ice cold, not getting a lot of depth scoring, not getting a lot of depth production. And as I mentioned, their defense is decimated with injuries right now. Now, before we get to the best of the rest, which is going to take a little bit of a different look this week, let's get to the goalie streams, just in case you're in need of a goaltender for your week next week. We'll get out in front of it right now. And let's start with Ivan Prosvetov. So they have 3 goaltenders right now in Arizona that are playing really well. Prosvetov has been one of them in his last 3 games, 3 wins, 1.67 goals against, 952 save percentage. So they have Vejmelka. He's still playing really well, especially at home. Anytime Arizona's at home, you want to take note of that and try to pick up their goalie if he's available on the wire. They also have Connor Ingram, who was exceptional over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then they, for whatever reason, are starting Ivan Prosvetov, maybe to see what they have in the system and see what they can work on and build towards going forward. But he's been really good in the 3 starts that he's had over the past couple of weeks. And he's only 4% owned, so he's likely there for you on your waiver wire. They do have a back-to-back Tuesday, Wednesday against Winnipeg and Edmonton. So they'll use Vejmelka for one of them, and then either Prosvetov or Ingram for the other game. And I would take a shot on either of those if you need a goaltending start. It is a difficult matchup, though, so keep that in mind. And if you're playing against Connor McDavid, I don't really like that bet. So I would prefer if they started Prosvetov against Winnipeg, but that's not much easier either. So if you need a little bit better of a matchup, maybe go with Alex Stalock, 9% owned. I mentioned this yesterday in the live stream. Chicago goaltenders have actually been playing really well lately, and Chicago has been playing spoiler as well. They've been beating some tough teams. Stalock, last 5 games, 3 wins, 2.47 goals against, and a 930 save percentage. They have a back-to-back Saturday against Minnesota, Sunday against Vancouver. So the Minnesota game, there's not going to be a lot of scoring, maybe on either side, because Kaprizov's out. Minnesota was scoring pretty well without him, but they only put up 2 last night against Boston. Vancouver is a pretty good offensive team, but Demko's playing really well as well. So maybe that game takes a little bit more of a defensive tone, just because of the talent of goaltending that could be available in that game. But either way, these are slightly better matchups than Winnipeg, Edmonton. If you need that starter, if you're looking for a 1A, 1B type of guy, Phoenix Copley is 53% owned. He could be available for you as well. But I like Jonas Korpisalo in addition to Copley. So if you have one of them, don't drop one for the other. But if you have one and you want to handcuff him to the other, it is a tough week to do that because they play Monday. They have the whole rest of the week off until Saturday, but they have a back-to-back Saturday, Sunday against Winnipeg and St. Louis. So whoever gets that St. Louis game, that's a little bit more favorable, but Korpisalo has been pretty good since coming over. 4 starts, 3 wins, 196 goals against, 916 save percentage. Yesterday he started against Vancouver. Didn't see a ton of shots, so his save percentage was a little bit lower. Goals against was still under 2, and they lost in the shootout. So that's not really his fault. They could have easily chipped away, and he would have had 4 wins and 4 starts for him. And he's been rocketing up the goalie rankings in the goalie hub. So the team exposure is great. He's a really good goaltender. He had a 912 save percentage on Columbus. Now he comes over to a much better defensive team, and he's probably going to continue that play going forward. This may not be the best week to own him for the entire week, but if you need that spot start and he's available on either Monday or Sunday, that would be a good place to find some value. Speaking of value and trying to find a back-to-back, Kevin Lankinen, 6% owned, last 3 starts, 3 wins, 162 goals against, 945 save percentage, and they have a back-to-back Saturday, Sunday against Seattle and Toronto. So that would be some difficult matchups for either game, but they're going to have to start Saros 3 out of the 4 games this week, and I would imagine they have to give Lankinen one of those back-to-backs, so he will start one of them. And they're still in a playoff hunt. They're still fighting for a wild card spot, despite the fact that they sold off at the deadline. So this is an important week for them. They're going to have to play good defensively, and to be honest with you, their defense isn't that bad if Roman Yossi's healthy. He was just knocked out of the game the other night. Don't know the extent of that injury yet, but with him, they still have McDonough. They brought in Tyson Barrie, so if Yossi's out, they still have a power play quarterback. Losing Ekholm does hurt, but This is a team that's been defying the odds all year. They don't score, so they have to do it with defense, and Lankinen has been benefiting from that for most of the season. I hesitate to mention this guy because his numbers are abysmal, but Dan Vladar, they have a back-to-back Monday and Tuesday against LA and Anaheim. If he gets that Tuesday night start against Anaheim, and if you only need one start from a goaltender, one spot start, I do like anybody's chances against Anaheim. They're just not winning games right now. And I don't like him against LA. They'll probably go to Markstrom against LA. That's a much more difficult matchup. But if Vladar gets in on Anaheim on Tuesday, that would be a little bit more of a beneficial start for Vladar, who's struggled in the past month or so. He's just had a rough go of it. They haven't been able to rely on him. Luckily for the Flames, Markstrom has picked up his game a little bit. So there is a little bit of a silver lining to that if you're a Flames fan, but Vladar has to get his game in order. They're going to need him to win a game or two down the stretch to get them into the playoffs, and the matchup against Anaheim is the one place that I think he could actually do that. So this is a question mark. I wouldn't necessarily think of this as my first option, which is why he's so far down on the list, but there is one potentially worse option, and that's whoever's Florida's backup against the Flyers on Tuesday. So right now, they have Spencer Knight in the player assistance program, so he's not necessarily available. They did have Alex Lyon playing a little bit. He's not called up right now. Right now, the guy who has been called up is Mac Guzda, who I've never heard of, 0% owned, has no stats to talk of, so I can't really mention anything he's done. 285 goals against, 900 save percentage in 25 AHL games this year. When Lyon was called up, he was pretty good. So if Lyon gets called up, he had a 3-2-1 record, 389 goals against, 887 save percentage, which is not great, but it's at least something of an NHL stat line compared to Guzda, who doesn't have anything this year. So I don't know who will be the backup, but they do have a back-to-back that you kind of have to try to mine some value out of, because Florida's been playing much better as they're trying to push to get into the playoffs. And the Flyers are a team that are still competitive, but they should win that game. They need to win that game if they're going to continue to make that playoff push. So whoever is the Florida backup, Bobrovsky's going to get the Monday night game. The Tuesday game would be the place to find some spot start value for their backup. But that's going to do it for the goalie streams, and now we'll look at the best of the rest, but we'll do it in a little bit of a different fashion. So now we're looking at the player hub, and it's sorted by the change interval. Obviously, Vrana has changed the most because he doesn't have a ton of games played, but if you're looking for elite level goals, elite level power play, and shots, he's one of the options that's available on your wire for most leagues. He's been one of those guys. He's playing with Pavel Buchnevich on the second line. I mentioned this in a fantasy file short. He's only 29% owned, so he's maybe available for you in a 12-team league, a 10-team league, an 8-team league. And St. Louis has surprisingly been much better offensively after the trade deadline. They've been giving some guys like Kapanen and Vrana some top 6 minutes. Braden Schen's playing a little bit better. Jordan Kyrou is on fire. So is Pavel Buchnevich. So to get access to some of those guys, at least their offensive production, this would be a nice play. But I did mention him on the Fantasy File Shorts. Ryan Hartman, he's been improving as well. I mentioned him yesterday in the live stream. He's been one of those guys that he produced really well on the top line when Kaprizov was in with Zuccarello last year. But now with Kaprizov out, he's getting more of an opportunity. He does like to shoot the puck, 2.5 shots per game. The power play numbers might come up because he's probably going to get more of a look there with Kaprizov out. They have to tweak some things on their power play. So he would be a potential option. And he does hit and block a little tiny bit, not a ton. Obviously, Keller's probably not there. We mentioned Michelli. Tomasino is another one of those guys. If you're looking for deep value, Tomasino, Thomas Novak, Evangelista, those guys in the top 6 or the top 9 in Nashville are getting a look right now. Tomasino getting some power play production, 88th percentile. The shots are a little low. I'd like to see them a little bit higher. Assist production is really good, and 0.67 points per game. And he's getting a look in the top 6 right now. So a top draft pick, a first rounder, finally getting a look, getting some offensive opportunities, and they need somebody to score. They're still making a playoff push. They have a 4-game week this week, so You could look at Tomasino. I'm just trying to pull up his ownership because he is one of those guys. He's 3% owned, so a deep league play, single position right winger, and he could be available for you on your wire. If you can't get him, everybody pretty much knows about Novak at this point. Thomas Novak, 91st percentile in goal production. He was scoring goals left and right when he first got called up. He dried up a little bit, but he has kind of continued that production, and he's still getting a look in the top 6. I believe he's on the second line now, but he is still in the top 6, getting some power play time. 10% owned, single position center, and he had a 5-game point streak going with 4 goals and 3 assists in that span. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. Yeah. So he's been really productive lately. Not a ton of shot volume in those games, the last couple of games, but for a guy who's only 10% owned, you could do a lot worse than Thomas Novak. So he would be another deeper league play. Alex Killorn, if you're looking for a Tampa Bay ad, he's one of those consistent guys that I typically go to. He's not going to wow you with what he does in terms of his production, but they seem to trust him a lot. They give him some power play time every now and then. 3/4 of a point per game, 86th percentile in goals, not a ton of shots, does get a little bit of power play time, 8 power play points on the season, but he's a pretty consistent guy that I go to if I need a Tampa Bay ad. If you're looking for shot volume, Mikael Backlund gets about 3 shots per game. He's been one of those guys that you can potentially find on the wire in a 12-team league. Backlund. And again, they're in a playoff push. They need some offensive production, and you're getting 3.28 shots per game out of Backlund. So this is a guy that I typically go to if I just need shots. And if you have to look at your matchup and see the other guy against you is putting up a ton of shots in a categories league, this will be a guy that can counteract that a little bit. The number one defensive ad, if you're just looking for a defenseman for the entire week, I do believe Montreal has a 3-game week this week, so that may affect it a little bit. And they're all the heavy nights, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. They also play Tampa Bay, Boston, and Columbus, so they might not be the best matchups. But somebody's got to score, and they have been productive. They've been scoring goals, and Matheson is the power play quarterback. He's been getting power play production. He gets a ton of blocks, and he's been really consistent and productive across all these categories, even hitting 1.29 hits per game. So he's been the number one defensive ad, very complete at a 78 overall. And then you continue down this list. Raquel's good for shots, but he's probably owned up. Hurdle may or may not be there for you on the wire. He's another example of a good player on a bad team that you could get access to. Jamie Benn's been red hot lately. He's probably owned up. Lawson Krause, I didn't cover his file, so let's look at his file just because he is on a team that has 3 light nights this week. 92nd percentile in hits, 89th in goals. The shots are a little low, but you're still getting close to 2 shots per game, and you're getting some blocks as well, almost 1 block per game. Gets some power play time every now and then, but he's mainly a hits and goals guy, similar to Zucker in that regard. Zucker does shoot a lot more, so if you have the choice between the two, Zucker is going to get a lot more shots, which will give you a better floor for that file, but nonetheless, if you need a deeper league option, Lawson Krause is a really consistent hitter, and he has been scoring goals. And we've mentioned him at various points throughout the season. He's now 21% owned, and he is dual eligible, so that could help you out as well. As we look down the list a little bit, Tara Vinen starting to find his game, just not that complete, very assist heavy. He's been one of those guys that you're waiting for him to come around. He's pretty owned up considering the fact that he's not that productive at 0.6 points per game. The shot volume's okay at 2.1 shots per game. Power play usage should be going up because they're losing guys like Svechnikov, and they need guys on that power play, and that's where Teravainen has made his money over the past couple of seasons, being around 0.3 to 0.4 power play points per game. He's about half that right now. So there is room for improvement in a 4-game week. It is a tough schedule, but they're going to need somebody to play on the power play, and he's one of those guys that's been doing it. Dawson Mercer's still playing well, still in the top 6 in New Jersey. Jonathan Huberdeau was dropped in my league, and he's started to find his game a little bit. Obviously, assists and power play are his main category coverages. Not a ton of shots, and the ownership might not be there for some league formats. He is dual eligible. He's 87% owned, but he was dropped in my league because people just gave up on him. They're tired of him. They don't want to deal with his lack of production. But he has 2 goals, 2 assists in his last 4 games, so he has been relatively productive. He did have a 3-game point streak, and then he did get a goose egg against Dallas. But nonetheless, if he's available, he's starting to find his game. Some of these other guys are mainly owned up. Riley Smith could be a nice little option for you. He's a pretty consistent streamer for me in terms of Vegas ads because he's pretty complete. Gets some goal production, gets a bunch of shots, and he's playing top 6 minutes in Vegas. So that would be a guy to look at. 0.71 points per game is really good as well. So this is another one of those guys that I routinely go back to. I just dropped him in one of my leagues because there's somebody that I wanted that was a little bit more productive, but nonetheless, if you need that production, and if you're looking at Vegas specifically, he's one of those guys that I go to. And then not a lot going down the list here because these are kind of marginal change intervals. Dylan Strome still really productive in Washington in their top 6. As I mentioned, TJ Oshie is probably the own for them. If you're looking at Washington owns, I'll just show you. Well, we have to clear out the point per game filter. By the way, if you want access to the Player Hub, you can get it for $3 in the Patreon link at the description below, and you can play around with this yourself and look for exactly what you need. You can play with these filters, filter by point per game, goal per game, assists, power play, hits, blocks, whatever you need. There's a filter for it, and you can find pretty much what you're looking for every time. Now, for John Carlson, this is why I was mentioning him, 83 on the hub, and when we clear this out, he'll be right at the top of the leaderboard. TJ Oshie is pretty much waiver eligible in a lot of leagues because people don't realize how productive he is and how complete he is. He's 42% owned. It should be higher because he's been really productive. And we'll pull up Oshie's file just to show you what he's doing hits-wise. 2.1 hits per game, getting 90th percentile in goals, 0.35 goals per game. Power play usage is still there. He's still the bumper guy on the power play, getting some shots as well. So some of these guys are a little bit owned up in terms of you're not going to get them in a deeper league, but a guy like Dylan Strome could give you access to TJ Oshie and some of these other offensive guys, and he's a lot less owned up. Just looking at his ownership right now at 35%, so a little bit lower nonetheless, and you're looking at anything that you can get in terms of trying to find what you need. You can find it on the Player Hub, and you can find the Player Hub in the link in the description below. But that's going to do it for this video. It's dragging on. It's almost 40 minutes. I apologize for that, but I want to give you all the info that you need to win your week. If you've made it thus far, let me know in the comments below how you're doing. I'll try to be as attentive as I can to answer your questions. There is a potential I'll be going live today just to help you out with some waiver ads, but it is getting late, so we'll have to wait and see about that. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.